as you would know, I have editorially argued for a long, long time, certainly since the day after the election anyhow, that Radio New Zealand News in particular has a state-funded anti-government agenda that has frankly been embarrassing. And that they have been aided and abetted in their welter of anti-government stories and their pro-dissent or pro-liberal left dissent stories by the New Zealand taxpayer, by you and me. They are the only media agency in New Zealand immune from the economic times and the changing markets that relate to media nationally in this country. They're made immune, much to my infuriation, I have to say, by your and my taxpayer dollars, by reaching into it, stealing it, and utilising it on themselves. They've increased the number of staff at a time when all other media agencies in New Zealand have been retrenching. They haven't retreated from their liberal left perspective. In fact, they've doubled down on it. And it's been almost impossible, in fact, it is impossible, to discern or discover a conservative voice in any of its opinion leaders, hosts, or commentators on that particular channel. So it's been no surprise then that they have liked to involve themselves in crusades, pyrrhic, chaotic, whatever, perhaps in some cases reasonable, against particular ministers and against particular government policies. The latest that they have chosen to take aim against is the Food Safety Minister, Andrew Hoggard, the ACT MP, former Federated Farmers Chairman by remembrance. As I said a couple of days ago, a get by ACT as a candidate. He gave them a credibility in the rural sector. And I think he is also the Associate Biosecurity Minister and Associate Agriculture as well. But he is in charge of food safety, which is a really, really weird portfolio. And as part of that, there is the suggestion that Andrew Hoggard was lobbied disgracefully, and it has to be said with integrity issues over something as prosaic as milk powder. Joining us to talk about this, but other issues, frankly, of far more importance, particularly around tariffs and trade and exports, Andrew Hoggard joins us now. Lovely to have you on board. Andrew, welcome to the show.
No worries. Thanks, Michael.
First of all, mate, just quickly, God, I'd hate to be Food Safety Minister. Just tell us a bit of background here. The Food Safety Minister does what?
So basically, a key part of our being able to trade with the world is the fact that we can, at a government-to-government level, assure overseas countries that our food is safe. So effectively, I'm administering the assurance network that tells the rest of the world, yep, it's good to buy our 40, 50 odd billion dollars worth of food exports because here is the structure we've put around in place of making sure they're safe, that there's no chemical residues in there that are too high, basic stuff like that. So it feels, people will think it's a very boring job, but actually I think it's a very important job.
No, fair enough too. You're also responsible for, and this is the bit that I find interesting, setting food standards in concert with the Australians. And I think I remember Annette King, who had your job once, saying that we were very much the hostage of the Australians when it came to food safety regulations and labelling, etc. Is that your experience as well?
So basically since I think it's 2014 or maybe a little bit longer actually, we've been in what's called Food Standards Australia and New Zealand. So it's a joint sort of standard setting body across the Tasman. Really important in terms of it reduces costs for our businesses in that they're able to export to Australia without red tape and having to change labels and things like that. But yeah, when there's a decision that's made on a particular standard, we get one vote, they get 9 votes because they vote, the federal gets a vote and each state and territory gets a vote. So if I could go back in time and change that treaty, I certainly would, to give us a little more sovereignty, but I'm not able to do that.
Was it a national government that put us into that rather bizarre relationship?
I cannot remember actually. I'd have to double check when the. I think
2014 it would be, wouldn't it?
Oh,
2014
no,
it would
sorry,
have to
that's
be.
the Food Act. That was the Food Act. I think it was before then, so I can't remember if it was the ending of Helen Clark's time or start of John Key's, or it may even
Right.
be before that.
Okay, so the
Well,
answer to
before I
that
got.
yeah, so the answer to the question is yes, Australia is dominant in terms of that. Listen, how did the baby formula? Now, can I just say, baby formula for anybody who's got kids in this country or Australia, it's just like all it needs to be is safe. And you've been lobbied by what was being proposed that landed you in this political issue with Radio New Zealand, Andrew?
So initially there was a proposal that effectively we couldn't put, any claims or any statements on the label of infant formula beyond the fact that it was infant formula and the nutrition information panel and a couple of other things. So there would have been things like made in New Zealand or organic, things like that we wouldn't have been able to put on the tin, which meant that when it gets exported to China, because a large part of our exports to China are through what's called the cross-border e-commerce channel, so the Chinese are buying the stuff that they know is on New Zealand supermarket shelves. It wouldn't have been able to say New Zealand. New Zealand, obviously, everyone recognises New Zealand, open wide spaces, good, safe, and there's a bonus for having that on there. Thankfully, all the dairy companies and others fed in, no, that's crazy, please don't do that. And then there was the final decision, there was just going to be some labelling ingredient claims that you weren't allowed to make on the front of the label, which, whilst an improvement, still put us at a disadvantage to the European Union, who were allowing their companies to put those ingredients on the label, and thus Chinese consumers, very discerning customers, they want to have all this information, they want to see this information. It was going to put us at a disadvantage in a market that's worth $2 billion to us. And so I went to the meeting trying to achieve a review so that we could potentially get a modification or change that. The Australian ministers weren't interested. And then basically the decision we were left with was opt out or opt in and try and seek a modification. And the decision we made was to opt out because that gave us the best guarantee of being able to get the outcome we wanted. So, we'll still try and work with them to, like 99% of the standard was good, just these labelling claims. So we're working on how we resolve that at the moment. But that's the guts of it. In terms of this lobbying, I mean, my sister is the executive director of Dairy Companies Association. She held that position well before I got to Parliament. And so there was some technical advice my office asked for her on what certain things mean in Codex, which is your international standard setting, but DCANS didn't take a position on what we should do at the end. So there was one technical question asked, and somehow that gets blown into intense lobbying.
Right. And the allegation is that because your sister played that role and was seeking or endeavouring to advocate on her organisation's behalf, either she should have stepped out of the room or you should have, because there would be the suggestion of impropriety. Is that correct? Or nepotism or something similar?
Well, that's the argument they're making, but the reality is, with that final decision, there were dairy companies that were on either side of the argument, and so DCANS didn't have a position. So she said, we're not commenting on what you should do because we don't have agreement amongst our members. And so there was no lobbying, or as I prefer to say, advocacy from Dairy Companies Association. There certainly was from individual dairy companies, but not at the DCANS level.